Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep look into something incredibly serious and, frankly, tragic. The devastating flash floods that hit central Texas just recently in early July 2025. It's resulted in a terrible loss of life, and, well, the search for missing people is still very much underway.
It really is an immense challenge. And today we want to go beyond just the immediate news reports. We're using a detailed CBS News report as our guide here to try and understand not just what happened, but why it was so deadly, and also what really critical questions this raises about, well, preparedness and how we respond to emergencies like this.
Right. So our mission today is really to unpack the sheer scale of this devastation. We need to look at the specific challenges that the geography of Central Texas presents and then really dig into that critical ongoing debate about the warnings, the emergency systems, all of that. You're going to get some, I think, truly eye-opening insights into why this region is known as Flash Flood Alley. So let's start with the immediate aftermath. Our sources detail a grim scene. This deep dive really begins in terms of reporting on Thursday, July 10th, 2025. That was day 7 of this intense ongoing search for, well, scores of missing people. The numbers are just stark. At least 121 people confirmed dead. That's according to local law enforcement and Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
Yeah, and what's just staggering on top of that is the number's still missing. Over 170 people still unaccounted for at the time of the report, and the vast majority of those 161 people are known missing just in Kirk County alone. There are at least 10 more in other parts of the state, but Kirk County, it's in a Texas hill country west of Austin, notoriously flood-prone. It just bore the absolute brunt of this disaster.
And the intensity, the sheer force of the flooding was immense. This catastrophic weekend storm just caused the Guadalupe River to swell so rapidly, near unprecedented levels. Get this in detail. In Hunt, which is in Kirk County, the river rose to about 26 feet. That's like a 2-story building. And it did that in just 45 minutes. 45 minutes in the early hours of Friday morning.
That number, 26 feet in 45 minutes. It's almost hard to process, isn't it? It tells you everything about why this isn't just, slow rise river flooding. This is a violent surge. It turns a bad storm into an almost instantaneous catastrophe. There's just no time. And that name, Flash Flood Alley, it's not hyperbole. It really describes how the geology, the terrain itself, creates this extreme, unique hazard. The Guadalupe River runs about 230 miles, through that whole region between Austin and San Antonio, starts in Kirk County, goes down to the Gulf Coast. So the whole area is vulnerable. And besides Kerr, we saw impacts in Travis County. That includes Austin, also Burnett, Kendall, Williamson, even Tom Green County.
And the search effort reflects that scale. It's just massive. Hundreds of rescuers. You've got local teams, state, federal agencies. FEMA is involved now, too. President Trump signed that federal disaster declaration Governor Abbott requested, so that freed up FEMA resources, their own teams deployed.
And you have to think about the toll on the rescuers themselves. It's immense. There's a quote from Texas Game Warden Ben Baker. He said, "It's very tragic whenever you see human life. But to see a child in that loss of life is extremely tragic." Really brings it home.
It really does, that quote. It cuts through the numbers, doesn't it? It reminds you these are individuals, families, just heartbreaking. And speaking of heartbreaking specifics, let's focus on one site mentioned prominently, Camp Mystic. This was a girls' summer camp. Cabins right there along the Guadalupe River in a rural area of Kerr County near Hunt.
And the impact there was just devastating. A huge portion of the deaths were in Kerr County, 96 fatalities there. At Camp Mystic alone, at least 27 campers and counselors died. Just awful. Survivors described waking up to water rushing through the windows. Can you imagine? Just waking up to that terror.
And the search continued. As of Wednesday, July 9th, crews were still looking for 5 missing campers and 1 counselor from the camp. Plus, another child who wasn't with the camp but was missing in that area. Governor Abbott mentioned that. To give you a sense of scale, there were about 650 people at the camp, around 550 kids. That's according to inspection records from the Texas Department of State Health Services dated July 2nd, just 2 days before the flood.
And this raises a really critical point about preparedness. The sources say Camp Mystic did have a written plan of procedures to be implemented in case of a disaster.
Okay.
It was apparently posted in the camp's admin office on site. But, well, first, it's unclear what exactly was in that plan. And crucially, the report states Camp Mystic did not evacuate to higher ground before the floods hit.
And that seems like such a critical detail, right? Because the sources also mention at least one other camp on the same river that did evacuate. It really highlights this key insight, doesn't it? Having a plan filed away somewhere, it's completely different from having a plan that actually triggers a life-saving action when needed.
Exactly. That gap between the document and the decisive response seems to have been, well, catastrophic in this case.
Governor Abbott visited the site afterwards, and he described it on social media as horrendously ravaged. Just gives you a sense of the destruction.
Which leads us naturally into why this region is so uniquely dangerous. Flash Flood Alley. It's more than a name. The actual terrain there makes emergency response incredibly difficult. It actively complicates things.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the specific challenges?
Well, these rural areas like around Hunt, they're filled with these single-lane bridges. They call them low water crossings. And they flood incredibly easily, very quickly. When they go under, they effectively create these scattered islands of land. People get cut off, trapped.
Right. Jonathan Lamb from the Kerrville Police described it well. He talked about Highway 39 in Hunt, how it crisscrosses the Guadalupe again and again and again. So on that morning, July 4th, you suddenly had all these impassable spots, these islands.
Yeah.
People trapped in homes and vehicles, just stranded.
And on top of the physical barriers, these are often areas with really spotty, inconsistent cell service. So communication breaks down, making it even harder for first responders to coordinate or even reach the people needing help.
Yet, despite all that, the dedication of the local folks, it was incredible. The report mentions this makeshift crew on Friday, 2 Kerrville officers, an ER doctor, some volunteer firefighters. For 13 hours, they were basically it, doing everything they could until the heavy-duty emergency vehicles could actually get through to them. Just amazing dedication.
It really is. And it also highlights, the complexity for officials making calls. Kerr County officials actually stated that just telling everyone to evacuate in the hill country isn't always the safest bet during a storm like this. A joint information center echoed that, saying disaster response in this kind of terrain is just inherently complex. Evacuation itself can be dangerous if the rights are already flooding.
Which brings us squarely to this really critical and pretty contentious debate now. Were the communities warned properly? Did people get enough notice? It's worth noting, Kerr County officials have mostly declined to answer reporters' questions on this specific point.
And there's been discussion about the federal level, too. Some people have questioned whether budget cuts earlier this year to the National Weather Service, the NWS, and its parent agency, NOAA, under the Trump administration, whether those cuts might have hampered local forecast offices, maybe prevented them from fully preparing the public for just how bad this was going to be. Though it's important to state, Mr. Trump and his administration have strongly rejected any idea that those federal staffing changes impacted the forecasting or the emergency prep for these floods.
It's interesting, though, because a CBS News analysis did find that the National Weather Service did issue 22 warnings for Kerr County related to the storms and flash flooding. And apparently the language in those warnings got increasingly urgent over time.
Right, but then you hear from local residents, some saying they never got any emergency alerts on their phones or just didn't grasp how truly serious it was until the water was literally at their door. So there's a disconnect.
How do we square that? Warnings issued, but maybe not received or understood.
Well, staffing might be part of the puzzle. The NWS union pointed out some details. The San Antonio and San Angelo Weather Service offices, they're the ones covering the affected areas. They're supposed to have 23 meteorologists combined. But they actually have 10 vacancies between them. And maybe most critically, the San Antonio office is missing someone in a key role, the warning coordination meteorologist. That person is the vital link, the translator essentially, between the complex weather forecasts and the local emergency managers who need clear, actionable info to get out to the public without that role filled. Well, you can see how a communication gap could easily open up.
That's a really crucial point. And there also seem to have been issues with the forecasts themselves, maybe. Nim Kidd, he's the chief of the Texas Division of Emergency Management, he said his office got forecasts predicting several inches of rain. But, quote, the amount of rain that fell at this specific location was never in any of those forecasts. And Dalton Rice, the Kerrville city manager, said something similar. The storm just dumped more rain than what was forecasted.
Yeah, the sheer intensity seems to have surprised even the forecasters to some degree. But perhaps the most glaring gap identified at the local level. Kerr County Judge Rob Kelly confirmed this at a news conference back on July 4th. He stated plainly that the county does not have a warning system in place to alert the public about weather emergencies. No sirens, no countywide alert system. He mentioned they'd discussed a public alarm system before, but didn't move forward because of the cost. And a former commissioner, Tom Moser, added that they'd applied for a grant for a system, but it wasn't approved.
Wow. No countywide warning system in Flash Flood Alley. That seems significant. So what's the response to that revelation?
Well, at the state level, L.T. Governor Dan Patrick suggested the state could help Kerr County get a system funded. He mentioned a special legislative session starting soon where they could potentially allocate money for sirens.
Yeah.
He sort of mused, maybe a siren would have sparked people to say, oh, we have a massive disaster like 5 minutes away.
Governor Abbott also weighed in, saying on Tuesday that everything would be on the table at that upcoming legislative session to look at ways to, quote, prevent deadly flooding events like this in the future.
And there's some other efforts underway, too. The Upper Guadalupe River Authority, the UGRA, they'd actually already secured funding and a contract to start developing a flood monitoring system for the area. Preliminary meetings were apparently scheduled for mid-July, right after this happened. The goal is a centralized dashboard to support local flood monitoring and emergency response.
Okay, but monitoring is different from alerting, right?
Right, exactly. That's a key distinction the Joint Information Center made clear. This new UGRA tool they're developing is not a public alert system. It's meant as a decision support resource for officials, to complement existing infrastructure. It helps them understand the situation, but doesn't directly warn the public itself. So it's a step, but maybe not the full solution people are looking for.
So wrapping this deep dive up, it's really clear we've gone way beyond just the initial headlines here. We've seen how a natural disaster, especially in a place like Central Texas with its unique vulnerabilities, how it becomes this incredibly complex tangle of human systems, communication failures or gaps, and just agonizingly difficult decisions at every level, local, state, federal.
Yeah, it really underscores the immense human cost, first and foremost, but also those specific challenges, the geography, the speed of the water rise. And these absolutely critical questions about warnings and preparedness, from federal funding debates and local NWS staffing, all the way down to whether a county even has a basic siren system. It's all interconnected, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it leaves us, and you listening, with this final, pretty challenging thought to consider. Given how unpredictable these flash flood alley events can be, how do we strike the right balance between the very real, significant costs of building robust warning systems and resilient infrastructure and the potential for just catastrophic loss of life and property when those systems aren't there or they're incomplete? And maybe critically, how do we make sure vital information actually reaches everyone effectively, especially when just telling people to evacuate isn't always safe or even possible in these incredibly fast-moving situations? A lot to think about there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.